My name is Isla, and I am 32 years old, a single mother living in Denver with my 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who means everything to me. I grew up with an emotionally abusive mother, Sandra, who I cut contact with for over 10 years. Just when I thought I had built a safe life for my daughter and myself, Sandra reappeared with shocking false allegations of abuse against me. What she never expected was that this time I would fight back and dismantle her entire life. Let me tell you how it happened, before I begin my story. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and join me as I share how I finally stood up to the most toxic person I have ever known. Growing up in small-town Nebraska, I never knew what version of my mother I would face each day. Sandra controlled every aspect of my life with an iron grip disguised as maternal concern. One minute, she would be braiding my hair, telling me how beautiful I was, and the next, she would be throwing away my favorite toys because I had laughed too loudly at the dinner table. Her emotional abuse took many forms. Sometimes, it was the silent treatment that would last for days. I would beg and plead, crying outside her bedroom door, after some perceived slight I had committed only to be ignored completely. Other times, it was the constant gaslighting telling me events never happened the way I remembered them, making me question my own reality. I never said that, Isla. You always twist my words. Something is wrong with you. The public humiliation was perhaps the most painful. Sandra had no qualms about criticizing my appearance, intelligence, or behavior in front of anyone, family, teachers, friends. Isla has always been so difficult, she would sigh dramatically to the grocery store cashier while I stood there, cheeks burning with shame. My father, James, was a kind but passive man who seemed perpetually bewildered by his wife's behavior. He would occasionally try to intervene, suggesting in his gentle way that perhaps Sandra was being too harsh. These attempts were always met with such fierce backlash that eventually he stopped trying. When I was 10, he finally left. I remember watching through my bedroom window as he packed his few belongings into his truck. Tears streaming down my face, knowing my buffer against Sandra's worst tendencies was disappearing. After the divorce, Sandra's control became even more suffocating. She blamed me for my father leaving, saying repeatedly, "He couldn't handle having such a difficult daughter." This became her favorite explanation for why he only made sporadic attempts to stay in contact, which dwindled to birthday and Christmas cards by the time I was 14. As a teenager, I developed severe anxiety and depression. I would have panic attacks before school, knowing that any small misstep would result in Sandra's wrath when I returned home. My report cards, despite showing straight A's, were never good enough. An A- in biology. What happened to the plus from last semester? Are you getting lazy? Nothing I accomplished was ever sufficient. Sandra had a particular talent for sabotaging my relationships. When I brought friends home, she would either be falsely saccharine, embarrassing me with baby stories and excessive attention, or she would be coldly dismissive, making them so uncomfortable they rarely returned. By 16, I had learned it was easier not to bring anyone home at all. Dating was out of the question. The one time I mentioned a boy I liked in my junior year, Sandra launched into a lecture about how I would end up pregnant and ruin my life, just like all the other trashy girls in this town. When she found notes from him in my backpack, she called his parents and told them I was troubled and they should keep their son away from me. Despite all of this, I threw myself into academics. The library became my sanctuary, a place Sandra rarely ventured. I joined every club and activity I could, anything to stay away from home longer. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Jenkins, was the first adult who seemed to notice something wasn't right. She encouraged me to apply for scholarships, bringing me applications and helping me complete them during lunch periods. When I received a full academic scholarship to the University of Colorado, it felt like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning person. I kept the acceptance letter hidden, knowing Sandra would find a way to ruin this too. I waited until just 2 months before the fall semester to tell her. Her reaction was exactly what I had expected. First came the guilt. After everything I have sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me, by abandoning me. Then the health concerns. My blood pressure has been so high lately. The doctor says stress could kill me. Is that what you want, Isla, to kill your mother? Finally, the dire predictions. You will fail out there. You have no idea how the real world works. When you come crawling back, do not expect me to welcome you with open arms. Despite the barrage, for the first time in my life, I held firm. At 18 years old, with 2 suitcases and my scholarship paperwork, I boarded a bus to Boulder, Colorado. As the bus pulled away, I saw Sandra in the rearview mirror, her face contorted in what I now recognize as the rage of losing control over her favorite victim. College was like entering a different dimension. For the first time, I could decide simple things like when to eat, what to wear, or how to spend my time without navigating a minefield of criticism and control. My roommate Tara was the first person to plainly call out what I had experienced. After witnessing one of Sandra's phone calls that left me in tears, she said simply, "Your mom is toxic, Isla. That's not normal. That's abuse." Those words were like a key unlocking something inside me. I began to see my childhood through a different lens. The constant calls and texts from Sandra took on a new light. She would phone up to 10 times a day, and if I didn't answer, she would call my dorm's front desk claiming family emergencies. Twice during my freshman year, she showed up unannounced at my dorm room, having driven 8 hours from Nebraska, demanding to know why I wasn't answering her calls. The second time, campus security had to escort her from the building. Financial control was her new weapon of choice. Though my scholarship covered tuition and housing, I needed money for books and living expenses. Sandra would promise to send money, then forget until I called, begging only to berate me for being irresponsible with finances. I got a part-time job at the campus bookstore to reduce my dependence on her, which only triggered more accusations about my new high and mighty attitude. During my junior year, I met Mason in my marketing class. He was brilliant, kind, and had this infectious laugh that made everyone around him smile. We were paired for a semester project, and our late nights working together gradually transformed into something more. Mason had grown up in a warm, supportive family that was so different from mine, it almost seemed like fiction. The first time he took me home for dinner with his parents, I waited anxiously for the passive-aggressive comments or subtle digs that never came. Mason was the first to suggest that perhaps limiting contact with Sandra would be healthier for me. He held me through panic attacks that followed her calls and helped me draft emails establishing boundaries. Sandra predictably hated him on principle. Without ever meeting him, she decided he was controlling me and turning me against my own mother. After graduation, I accepted a position at a marketing firm in Denver, and Mason found work as a graphic designer at a local agency. We moved into a small apartment together, and for the first time, I began to understand what a healthy home environment felt like. We got engaged a year later, and I braced myself for Sandra's reaction to the wedding plans. She did not disappoint. From the moment I called with the news, Sandra launched a campaign to either control or sabotage our wedding. She insisted on being involved in every decision while simultaneously criticizing each choice. She called our venue to change arrangements without my knowledge, contacted vendors to cancel orders, and told extended family members the wedding was postponed when it wasn't. Mason was my rock through it all. "We can elope if that would be easier," he offered one night after Sandra had called in tears claiming I was excluding her from mother-daughter traditions. But I wanted our wedding day to be special, and more importantly, I wanted to prove to myself that I could stand up to her. We set firm boundaries for the wedding planning, giving Sandra specific limited tasks and making it clear that overstepping would result in her role being further reduced. She tested those boundaries constantly, but for once in my life, I held firm. The wedding itself should have been the happiest day of my life, and in many ways, it was. Mason's face as I walked down the aisle, our personal vows that left not a dry eye in the house, dancing under strings of lights with our closest friends. All those moments were magical. But like a dark cloud hovering at the edges, Sandra found ways to create drama throughout the day. She arrived at the bridal suite already in tears, claiming the hairstylist had ruined her look on purpose. During the ceremony, she sobbed so loudly that the officiant had to pause twice. At the reception, she cornered Mason's mother and spent 20 minutes telling her all the ways I had been a disappointing daughter. The final straw came when she interrupted our first dance to inform us that the DJ had played the wrong song despite it being exactly what we had requested. On our honeymoon in Costa Rica, Mason and I had a long talk about my relationship with my mother. Away from her influence in a place so beautiful, it seemed to heal something inside me. I made the decision to go no contact with Sandra after we returned home. It wasn't easy. Sandra refused to accept my decision. She called my workplace so often that my boss had to speak with me about it. She showed up at our apartment unannounced. She sent flying monkeys in the form of distant relatives and family friends to guilt me into reconnecting. Eventually, after months of this behavior and a particularly frightening incident where she followed me from work to a grocery store, we had our lawyer send a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if the harassment continued. To my surprise, it worked. Sandra backed off, though I would occasionally hear through the family grapevine that she was portraying herself as the victim of a heartless daughter who had abandoned her. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what Sandra thought or said about me. I was free, and with therapy and Mason's support, I began the long process of healing from my childhood. The next 5 years were the happiest of my life. Mason and I settled into a rhythm that felt like home. My career at the marketing firm took off with a promotion to senior account manager that allowed us to buy a small but charming house in a quiet Denver neighborhood. Mason's freelance graphic design business flourished, attracting high-profile clients throughout the city. After lengthy discussions about our future, we decided to start a family. Having grown up with Sandra, I had intense fears about parenthood. Would I somehow become like her? Would I know how to be the mother I never had? My therapist helped me work through these anxieties, reminding me that awareness was the first step in breaking generational patterns. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Severe morning sickness kept me hospitalized twice during the first trimester. By the second trimester, complications arose that put me on bed rest for the final 12 weeks. Mason was incredibly supportive, working from home to care for me, attending every appointment, and reading every pregnancy and parenting book he could find. Despite the challenges, the day Lily entered our world was the most profound of my life. She arrived after 22 hours of labor, a tiny bundle with Mason's dark hair and my green eyes. Holding her for the first time, I made a silent promise that she would never know the kind of childhood I had experienced. She would be safe, loved, and respected as her own person. The early months of parenthood were a blur of sleepless nights, breastfeeding struggles, and the overwhelming love that consumed me whenever I looked at my daughter. Mason took to fatherhood, naturally pacing the hallway with Lily at 3 a.m, singing Beatles songs until she drifted back to sleep. Then, when Lily was just 6 months old, Mason began experiencing persistent headaches. At first, we dismissed them as stress and sleep deprivation, the natural consequence of new parenthood. When they were joined by occasional dizziness, he finally agreed to see a doctor. The diagnosis came like a wrecking ball into our perfect life. An aggressive brain tumor already at stage 4. The prognosis was grim from the start, but Mason approached his illness with the same positive energy he brought to everything. "We fight," he told me the night of his diagnosis, holding my hand across our kitchen table. "For you and for Lily, we fight with everything we have." The next year was a nightmare of treatments, hospital stays, and watching my vibrant husband slowly fade. I juggled caring for an infant with supporting Mason through brain surgery, radiation, and experimental treatments that ravaged his body but did little to slow the cancer's progression. Through it all, we tried to create moments of normalcy for Lily. Mason would sit with her in the backyard pointing out birds and clouds. He recorded videos reading her favorite books so she could hear his voice even when he was hospitalized. We took thousands of photos knowing that memories would be all she had of her father. Mason died on a quiet Tuesday morning when Lily was 18 months old. I was holding his hand, Lily asleep in a portable crib beside his hospice bed. His last words were about her. "Tell her every day how much her daddy loved her," he whispered. "Tell her I will always be watching over both of my girls." The grief was overwhelming. Some days getting out of bed to care for Lily was all I could manage. Mason's parents, Tom and Elaine, were incredible, coming from Portland to stay with us for months after his death. They helped establish routines for Lily and gave me space to process my loss when I needed it most. My circle of friends rallied around us. Meal trains, childcare help, even cleaning services were organized without my having to ask. My boss arranged for me to work from home 3 days a week, understanding that as a suddenly single mother, flexibility was crucial. Slowly, painstakingly, we established a new normal. Our house, once filled with Mason's laughter, became a sanctuary of memory and growth. I hung his artwork everywhere, played the music he loved, and told Lily stories about her daddy every night before bed. By the time Lily turned 4, she was a bright, curious child who asked increasingly complex questions about Mason. "Where do people go when they die?" she asked one night. "Does Daddy miss me as much as I miss him?" These moments broke my heart anew, but I answered as honestly and age-appropriately as I could, always emphasizing how deeply Mason had loved her. As Lily grew into a creative, thoughtful 8-year-old, our lives settled into a comfortable rhythm. School drop-offs and pickups, weekend art classes where her talent clearly echoed her father's, movie nights cuddled on the couch with popcorn and hot chocolate. I advanced to marketing director at my firm, finding fulfillment in my career while maintaining work-life balance for Lily's sake. Throughout these years, I had no contact with Sandra. Occasionally, my father, who had remarried and settled in Arizona, would mention in his rare calls that Sandra asked about me. I always changed the subject. A cousin who still lived in my hometown sometimes sent holiday updates that included news of Sandra joining a new church or taking a cruise. I acknowledged these with polite disinterest. As far as I was concerned, that chapter of my life was closed permanently. Lily had never met her maternal grandmother, and I intended to keep it that way. The family she knew and loved consisted of Tom and Elaine, who visited regularly and adored their only grandchild. My small circle of close friends, and the memory of her father that we kept alive every day. Then 2 months after Lily's 8th birthday, an email arrived that would shatter our hard-won peace. The sender was Sandra, the subject line simply, "Please read, I have cancer." The email sat unopened in my inbox for 3 days. Every time I saw Sandra's name, my stomach clenched with a familiar anxiety I thought I had overcome years ago. Finally, late one night after Lily was asleep, I poured a glass of wine and clicked on the message. "Dear Isla," it began. "I know I have no right to contact you after all this time. I have respected your wishes for years, though it has broken my heart not to know you or my granddaughter. I am writing now because I've been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The treatments are difficult, and facing mortality has made me reevaluate my life and my mistakes. You were always the best thing in my life, and I handled that responsibility terribly. I understand if you want nothing to do with me, but before I possibly leave this world, I wanted you to know how deeply sorry I am for the pain I caused you. If there is any chance of meeting my granddaughter before it's too late, it would mean everything to me. With love and regret, your mother." I closed my laptop, emotions swirling. Was this manipulation or genuine remorse? Could people like Sandra truly change? I thought of Lily, who occasionally asked about my parents, curious about that missing branch of her family tree. Part of me wanted to delete the email and pretend it never arrived. Another part wondered if I was being unnecessarily cruel by not even considering her request. The next day, I called my therapist, Dr. Winters, and scheduled an emergency session. We had worked together for years, and she knew my history with Sandra intimately. "What do you want to do?" she asked after I showed her the email. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks this is just another manipulation. But what if she really is sick? What if she has changed?" "People can change," Dr. Winters said carefully. "But change requires insight, effort, and usually professional help." "Has Sandra ever acknowledged her behavior or sought therapy to your knowledge?" "Not that I'm aware of," I replied. "This is the first time she's even used the word sorry in relation to how she treated me." We discussed the possibility of a cautious, limited response with clear boundaries established from the start. "Remember," Dr. Winters emphasized, "you owe her nothing. Any contact would be your choice on your terms and could end at any point you feel uncomfortable." I also consulted my closest friends, Sarah and Daniel, who had known me since college and understood the depth of trauma Sandra had caused. "I'll support whatever you decide," Sarah said, "but please be careful. Don't let her back into your life without serious safeguards." After a week of consideration, I replied to Sandra's email. I expressed sympathy for her health situation, but made it clear that any potential contact would need to be slow supervised and contingent on her respecting my boundaries. I specified that I would consider a single meeting in a public place, but made no promises beyond that. Sandra's response came within minutes, full of gratitude and assurances that she would abide by any conditions I set. We arranged to meet the following Saturday at a park near my home. I asked Sarah to come with me, staying at a nearby picnic table with Lily until I determined whether the interaction with Sandra was safe. The morning of the meeting, my anxiety was through the roof. I almost canceled 3 times. What finally pushed me to go through with it was the thought that I needed to face this demon from my past, if only to prove to myself that she no longer held power over me. The woman who sat waiting on the park bench was almost unrecognizable from the mother I remembered. Sandra had aged considerably, her once auburn hair now completely gray and thinned, likely from chemotherapy. She had lost weight, her clothing hanging loosely on her frame. When she saw me approaching, her eyes filled with tears. Our conversation was awkward at first, years of silence and hurt creating a chasm between us. Sandra seemed genuinely emotional, apologizing repeatedly for her past behavior without making excuses. She spoke of therapy she had started after her diagnosis, realizations about her own abusive upbringing, and regrets that had haunted her for years. After about 30 minutes, when I felt reasonably comfortable that she wasn't going to cause a scene, I signaled to Sarah. She brought Lily over, who regarded this stranger with natural curiosity. "Lily, this is Sandra. She's my mother," I said, carefully avoiding the term grandmother until I was more confident in where this relationship might go. Sandra was clearly overwhelmed meeting Lily fighting back tears as she remarked on how beautiful she was and how much she looked like me at that age. To her credit, she didn't push for hugs or excessive familiarity, keeping a respectful distance even as her eyes drank in every detail of the granddaughter she had never met. Lily, always social, asked Sandra questions about herself and showed her a drawing she had made that morning. Their interaction was pleasant, if somewhat reserved on both sides. After about 20 minutes, I signaled it was time to go, not wanting to overwhelm either of them. As we prepared to leave, Sandra thanked me profusely for the opportunity to meet Lily. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," she said, "but I'm so grateful you're considering it." Over the next few weeks, I allowed more supervised visits. Each time, Sandra brought thoughtful gifts for Lily, books that matched her interests, art supplies of surprisingly good quality, once even a beautiful handmade quilt she claimed to have worked on throughout her treatment. She never arrived empty-handed, and while part of me was uncomfortable with the excessive gift-giving, Lily was delighted by the attention. Sandra initially seemed respectful of the boundaries I established. No visits at our home, no unsupervised time with Lily, no discussions of the past in front of Lily. no contradicting my parenting decisions. Gradually, however, I noticed subtle shifts. Comments about Lily's diet. Don't you think she's a bit thin? Are you sure she's getting enough protein? Questions about her schedule. 8:30 seems so early for bedtime at her age, doesn't it? Observations about our home when she glimpsed photos on Lily's tablet. That playroom looks quite cluttered. Children thrive in organized spaces. Each comment was minor on its own, delivered with a smile or a light tone that made me question whether I was being oversensitive. But together, they formed a familiar pattern that sent warning signals through my system. When Sandra began requesting unsupervised time with Lily, just a trip to the ice cream shop, or an afternoon at the Children's Museum, I held firm to my boundaries. This led to tense moments where I could see the old Sandra flickering behind her eyes, though she quickly composed herself. Lily had grown attached to her new grandmother, enjoying the attention and gifts. "Why can't I go to Grandma Sandra's house?" she asked after one visit. "She says she has a special room just for me there." This was news to me. Sandra had never mentioned preparing a room for Lily, nor had she invited us to her home. The fact that she had discussed this with Lily without consulting me first was concerning. Around this time, I received an email from Lily's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, asking about some concerns Sandra had raised during a parent-teacher conference. I was baffled I hadn't scheduled any conference, and Sandra certainly had no authority to attend one. When confronted, Sandra claimed it was all a misunderstanding. "I just stopped by to introduce myself as Lily's grandmother. The teacher invited me in for a quick chat. I mentioned how worried you've been about Lily's adjustment since Mason's death. I was trying to help." This was manipulative on multiple levels. Lily had been 3 when Mason died. While she certainly experienced grief, she had adjusted well with therapy and support. And I had never discussed any concerns with Sandra. I limited contact after this incident, allowing only one brief visit every few weeks, always with my direct supervision. Sandra seemed to accept this change, apologizing again for overstepping. Then suddenly, the calls and emails stopped. 2 weeks passed with no contact from Sandra. I was both relieved and suspicious. This wasn't like her to simply accept a limitation I had imposed. Something felt wrong, but I pushed the concern aside, grateful for the respite from the walking on eggshells feeling that had returned to my life. I should have known that silence from Sandra never meant surrender. It meant she was planning something worse. The knock on my door came at 7:45 on a Tuesday morning as I was helping Lily pack her backpack for school. 2 people stood on my porch, a woman in a crisp pantsuit and a uniformed police officer. The woman introduced herself as Diane Mercer from Child Protective Services. "We've received some concerning reports about your daughter's well-being." She stated, her voice professional but cold. "We need to conduct an immediate home inspection and interview both you and Lily separately." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. There must be some mistake. I stammered, my mind racing to understand what was happening. "May we come in, Mrs. Bennett?" the officer asked. "Or would you prefer we conduct this discussion at the station?" I let them in, feeling like I was moving through a nightmare. Diane explained they had received an anonymous report alleging neglect, emotional abuse, and unsafe living conditions. The details were specific unsupervised access to dangerous medications, inappropriate media content, inadequate food, and emotional manipulation related to the child's deceased father. While the officer began examining our home, Diane asked to speak with Lily alone in her bedroom. I wanted to refuse to protect my daughter from this intrusion, but knew that would only make things look worse. Instead, I knelt down to Lily's level. "This lady needs to ask you some questions, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just answer honestly. Okay, everything's fine." Lily's confusion was evident as she nodded and led Diane to her room. The 30 minutes that followed were among the most agonizing of my life. I sat at our kitchen table answering the officer's questions while straining to hear what was happening in Lily's room. "When was your husband's passing?" the officer asked, scribbling notes. 6.5 years ago. Lily was 18 months old. And you've been the sole caregiver since then." Yes, with support from his parents and close friends. Are you currently taking any medications for depression or anxiety? The questions continued probing into every aspect of our lives. By the time Diane emerged from Lily's room, my daughter's eyes were red from crying. I rushed to her, pulling her into my arms. Mommy, why did she ask if you tell me bad things about Daddy? You don't do that, do you? Lily whispered against my neck. My blood ran cold. There was only one person who would make such a specific accusation. After the investigators left, promising to follow up soon, I called my boss to take an emergency personal day. Lily was too upset to go to school, and frankly, I was too shaken to be alone. I made hot chocolate, put on Lily's favorite movie, and once she was settled on the couch, I stepped into my home office to make some calls. First, I called the CPS office directly asking for more information about the report. As expected, they couldn't reveal the source of the anonymous tip, but the intake worker confirmed the report came with extensive documentation of alleged concerns. Next, I called Mrs. Patterson at school. After some hesitation, she admitted that Lily's grandmother had come to her multiple times with worries about my parenting. She mentioned you've been struggling since your husband died, possibly self-medicating. She was so concerned, Isla. She brought photos of Lily looking thin and sad. Photos. Sandra had been taking photos of Lily during their visits and manipulating them or selecting unflattering angles to build her case. The realization made me physically ill. My suspicions were confirmed when a friend called that evening. Isla, have you seen Sandra's Facebook page? She's posting about fighting to save her granddaughter from an unsafe situation. There are dozens of supportive comments. I hadn't checked Sandra's social media in years, having blocked her on all platforms. Using my friend's account, I found a carefully crafted narrative of a concerned grandmother witnessing troubling signs of neglect and fighting against a daughter who was unstable since becoming a widow. The final bomb dropped 3 days later when I was served with papers. Sandra had filed for emergency custody of Lily, claiming I was emotionally unstable, neglectful, and using my daughter as a replacement for my deceased husband. The court had granted a temporary order for supervised visitation pending investigation, meaning I would have to allow Lily to see Sandra under the supervision of a court-appointed monitor. My world was collapsing. The panic attacks I hadn't experienced in years returned with a vengeance. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, could barely function. The thought of Sandra potentially gaining custody of my daughter, subjecting Lily to the same abuse I had endured, was unbearable. My friends rallied around me once again. Sarah and Daniel took turns staying at my house, ensuring I wasn't alone with my darkest thoughts. Tom and Elaine Mason's parents flew in from Portland immediately, providing both emotional support and financial resources for what we all knew would be a costly legal battle. "She will not take our granddaughter," Tom said firmly, his voice breaking. "Mason would move heaven and earth to protect Lily, and so will we." With their help, I found Jennifer Diaz, an attorney specializing in family law, with experience fighting false accusations in custody cases. She didn't sugarcoat the situation. These types of allegations are devastating because they're designed to trigger automatic protective responses from the courts, she explained during our first meeting. The system is built to err on the side of caution when a child's safety is questioned, but false allegations leave evidence trails, and your mother has made several tactical errors already. At the initial court appearance, I came face to face with Sandra for the first time since the park visits had stopped. She sat across the courtroom dressed conservatively in a modest blue dress, her hair styled to emphasize her fragile health. When she caught my eye, she quickly looked down, playing the part of the reluctant whistleblower who only wanted what was best for her granddaughter. The judge ordered a full psychological evaluation for both Sandra and me, as well as a comprehensive home study. Lily would need to speak with a court-appointed therapist. In the meantime, the supervised visitation would continue, meaning Lily would have to spend time with the woman who was trying to destroy our family. Leaving the courtroom, I felt both terrified and determined. Sandra had declared war on me once again, but this time she had targeted the one person I would fight to the death to protect. This wasn't going to end like our conflicts in the past, with me retreating to lick my wounds. This time, I would stand my ground and expose Sandra for who she truly was. Jennifer wasted no time developing our strategy. "The best defense is a good offense," she explained during our second meeting. "We need to be proactive in gathering evidence of your stable home environment and parenting, while simultaneously investigating Sandra's credibility and motives. Our first priority was collecting character references from people who knew me as a mother. My boss wrote about my dedication to balancing work and family. Lily's pediatrician provided records showing she was in excellent health, up to date on all medical care, and developing normally. Her teachers described her as well-adjusted, sociable, and academically thriving a child who showed no signs of distress until the CPS investigation began. The home study worked strongly in our favor. The social worker found our house clean, safe, and filled with evidence of a child-centered environment. Lily's room was bright and personalized, her artwork proudly displayed throughout the house, her school projects carefully preserved. The kitchen was well stocked with healthy foods, her schedule posted clearly on the refrigerator, showing a structured routine with plenty of time for homework, play, and family activities. My psychological evaluation revealed exactly what I knew about myself. A mother still processing grief but mentally stable with appropriate coping mechanisms and strong support systems. The evaluator noted my clear understanding of child development and healthy attachment relationship with Lily. Meanwhile, Jennifer hired a private investigator to look into Sandra's background and current activities. What they uncovered was illuminating. Sandra had a pattern of similar behavior with others. 2 former friends had ended relationships with her after she spread rumors about their parenting. A neighbor had moved away after Sandra repeatedly called animal control with false reports about neglected pets. She had been asked to leave a volunteer position at her church after attempting to have another volunteer removed through manipulated evidence. The investigator also discovered an online support group for alienated grandparents, where Sandra had been an active participant for over a year. In posts under a thinly veiled pseudonym, she had detailed her plans to rescue her granddaughter from me, seeking advice on how to build a case for custody and discussing strategies for documenting evidence of neglect. In one damning post, she admitted to deliberately taking photos of Lily when she was tired or cranky to document her distress. Most shocking of all, the investigator found no medical records supporting Sandra's claimed cancer diagnosis. She had used the fabricated illness as the initial sympathy hook to regain access to my life. The credit check Jennifer ran revealed Sandra had accumulated significant debt in recent months, much of it on credit cards used to purchase expensive gifts, not just for Lily, but for various people connected to our lives, including Mrs. Patterson. She had sent gift baskets to Lily's school principal, made donations to the PTA, and even delivered home-baked goods to neighbors on our street, all while introducing herself as the concerned grandmother. Armed with this information, Jennifer began building our counter case. We documented every inconsistency in Sandra's allegations and collected evidence of her manipulation. Former family members hearing about the situation came forward with their own stories of Sandra's controlling and deceptive behavior. My father, who had remained distant but cordial over the years, provided a sworn statement about the emotional abuse he had witnessed during their marriage. Lily, meanwhile, was struggling with the situation. The court-mandated supervised visits with Sandra were confusing and stressful for her. The court-appointed therapist reported that Lily showed anxiety before and after these visits and had begun having nightmares. "She keeps asking me if I'm happy," Lily told me after one visit. "She says you seem so sad all the time and that you need help. But you're not sad all the time, Mommy. Why does she say that?" I worked closely with Lily's regular therapist, Dr. Chen, to help her process these confusing messages while maintaining appropriate boundaries. We never spoke negatively about Sandra in front of Lily, instead focusing on validating her feelings and reinforcing that she was safe and loved. Dr. Chen documented the impact of Sandra's behavior on Lily's emotional well-being, noting the emergence of anxiety symptoms that hadn't been present before. This documentation became another crucial piece of evidence for our case. As the final custody hearing approached, Sandra's behavior grew increasingly desperate and erratic. She began reaching out to my friends with fabricated stories about my past, hoping to turn them against me. She sent emails to my workplace raising concerns about my job performance. She even approached Tom and Elaine, suggesting that as Mason's parents, they should support her custody petition for Lily's sake. These tactics backfired spectacularly. Each person she contacted came directly to me, providing additional evidence of her manipulation. Her increasingly frantic attempts to control the narrative only revealed more clearly the disturbed mind behind the grandmotherly facade. Through it all, I maintained a laser focus on two things: protecting Lily from as much of the drama as possible and methodically building our case. The stress was enormous, the legal costs mounting, despite Tom and Elaine's help, but I refused to back down. I had spent my childhood and much of my adult life being manipulated and controlled by Sandra. I would not allow her to do the same to my daughter. As the final hearing date approached, Jennifer assured me we had built a compelling case. "The judge will see through this," she said confidently. "We have facts, documentation, and credible witnesses. Sandra has only manipulation and lies." The night before the hearing, I sat in Lily's room long after she fell asleep, watching her peaceful face in the soft glow of her nightlight. I thought of Mason, of the promise I had made to protect our daughter. "I won't let you down," I whispered to both of them. "Not this time." The courtroom was uncomfortably warm on the day of the final hearing. I sat beside Jennifer, hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Sandra sat with her attorney, a stern woman who had built a reputation on championing grandparents' rights. Sandra had dressed for maximum sympathy effect, a modest outfit that hung loosely on her frame, minimal makeup to emphasize her supposedly illness-ravaged appearance, a decorative scarf covering her fully intact hair that she had claimed would be lost to chemotherapy. The judge, a silver-haired woman with penetrating eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the court to order. "This case has generated an unusual amount of documentation," she noted. "I have reviewed all submissions thoroughly and am prepared to hear final arguments and testimony." Sandra's attorney presented her case, first painting a heart-wrenching picture of a concerned grandmother witnessing troubling signs of neglect and emotional abuse. Sandra took the stand, dabbing at her eyes as she described her growing alarm at my parenting. "Lily often appeared unwashed and hungry during our visits," she claimed. "She would ask for food the moment we met, as if she hadn't been fed properly." This was a deliberate misrepresentation of Lily's excitement about their special treat outings, something Jennifer would later highlight. When I gently raised concerns with my daughter, she became defensive and began limiting my access to Lily. Sandra continued. "I feared retaliation, but my granddaughter's well-being had to come first." The most disturbing part of her testimony concerned Mason. "Isla has never properly processed her grief," Sandra said solemnly. "She uses Lily as an emotional replacement for her husband, forcing the child to look at photos of a father she cannot remember and telling her stories about him constantly. It's creating confusion and distress for Lily, who just wants to be a normal child." My hands clenched into fists at this cruel distortion of the loving way I had kept Mason's memory alive for our daughter. When Sandra's attorney asked about her cancer diagnosis, she spoke vaguely of ongoing treatments and cautious optimism from my doctors, careful to avoid specific claims that could be directly refuted. During cross-examination, Jennifer was methodical and precise. "Mrs. Harmon, can you provide the name of your oncologist?" she asked. Sandra hesitated. "Dr. Williams at Mercy General." "Interesting," Jennifer replied. According to Mercy General's records, they have never employed an oncologist by that name. Would you like to amend your statement? Sandra's face tightened. I must have misspoken. The cancer center I attend is confidential. Like the online support group where you discussed fabricating evidence against your daughter. Jennifer pressed, presenting printouts of Sandra's posts. As Jennifer continued her questioning, Sandra's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. She contradicted herself repeatedly about timelines, grew defensive about her financial records showing excessive spending on gifts for Lily and others connected to our case, and finally lost her composure when confronted with statements from former acquaintances about her pattern of manipulative behavior. "These people are all liars," she exclaimed, her voice rising sharply. "They've always been jealous of my relationship with Isla. When my turn came to testify, I spoke from the heart about my commitment to Lily's well-being, my efforts to heal from my own childhood trauma, and the support system I had built to ensure Lily grew up in a healthy, loving environment. I explained my initial caution about allowing Sandra into our lives based on my experience of her abusive behavior. I wanted to believe she had changed, I said. I wanted Lily to have a grandmother in her life. But Sandra quickly reverted to the same patterns of control and manipulation that characterized my childhood. Dr. Chen testified about Lily's previously stable emotional health and the anxiety that emerged only after Sandra's reappearance and subsequent legal action. The court-appointed evaluator confirmed that my home was safe and appropriate and that Lily showed all signs of secure attachment and proper care. The most powerful testimony came from Tom and Elaine. As Mason's parents, they had no obligation to support me over another biological grandparent, making their statement particularly compelling. We have observed Isla as a mother for 8 years, Elaine testified. She has raised Lily with extraordinary love and care under difficult circumstances. She has honored our son's memory while helping Lily develop into a happy, well-adjusted child. The allegations against her are not only false, but cruel. As the hearing progressed, Sandra's demeanor shifted from sympathetic victim to visibly agitated. When Jennifer presented evidence of Sandra's fabricated cancer diagnosis, including records showing she had been on a Caribbean cruise during times she claimed to be undergoing chemotherapy, Sandra's face contorted with rage. The judge's final questions focused on Lily's well-being. How has your daughter been affected by these proceedings? She asked me. She's confused and anxious. I answered honestly. She doesn't understand why someone who gave her gifts and attention is now causing such turmoil. She has nightmares before scheduled visits. Her teacher has noticed she's more withdrawn at school. We're working with her therapist to help her process these feelings, but the ongoing stress is taking a toll. After final arguments, the judge called a brief recess to consider her ruling. Those 45 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in the hallway with Jennifer, Tom, and Elaine, too nervous to speak. When court reconvened, the judge's expression was stern as she delivered her ruling. This court has seen many contentious family cases, she began, but few with such clear evidence of deliberate manipulation and false allegations as the case before us today. She turned her gaze directly to Sandra. Mrs. Harmon, the evidence overwhelmingly indicates that you have fabricated allegations against your daughter, manipulated others into supporting your false claims, and shown willing disregard for how your actions would affect your granddaughter, the very child you claim to be protecting. The judge continued, I find no credible evidence of neglect or inappropriate parenting by Ms. Bennett. To the contrary, all professional evaluations indicate she is providing an exemplary home environment for her daughter, despite significant challenges. Her ruling was decisive. Not only was Sandra's custody petition denied, but a restraining order was granted prohibiting her from contacting either Lily or me. She was ordered to remove all social media posts regarding us and forbidden from discussing the case publicly. Any violation would result in contempt charges. This court takes a very dim view of using false allegations of child abuse or neglect as weapons in family disputes, the judge concluded. Such actions not only harm the individuals involved, but divert precious resources from children who are genuinely at risk. As the judge's gavel fell, Sandra stood up abruptly. "This is outrageous!" she shouted. "She's poisoned everyone against me. She always does this." Two court officers moved quickly to restrain her as she continued shouting accusations, her face contorted with rage. This public meltdown, witnessed by everyone in the courtroom, was the final unmasking of the true Sandra behind the concerned grandmother persona. As she was escorted from the courtroom still shouting, I felt no satisfaction or vindication. Only exhaustion relief and a profound sadness for what might have been if Sandra had truly been capable of change. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by the people who had supported me through this ordeal, I finally allowed myself to cry tears of relief and released tension. Tom embraced me tightly, whispering, "Mason would be so proud of how you fought for Lily." Those words meant everything. The aftermath of the hearing brought unexpected consequences for Sandra. Her public meltdown was witnessed by several members of her church community who had come to support her, believing her claims about my unfitness as a mother. Confronted with the reality of her deception and manipulative behavior, many withdrew their friendship. Family members who had sympathized with her narrative of being an alienated grandmother now understood the truth of the situation. Her own sister called me a week after the hearing, apologizing for believing Sandra's lies and offering a relationship independent of her. Sandra's reputation in her community was irreparably damaged. Unable to face the social consequences of her exposed deception, she eventually sold her house and moved to another state, effectively removing herself from our lives. I worked with Dr. Chen to help Lily process what had happened in age-appropriate ways. We never vilified Sandra, instead, focusing on concepts like trust boundaries and how adults sometimes make mistakes. Over time, Lily's anxiety diminished, and her natural resilience reasserted itself. A year after the court case, our lives had returned to a peaceful rhythm. Tom and Elaine visited more frequently, deepening their relationship with Lily. My circle of friends, proven trustworthy through the crucible of Sandra's manipulations, became even more like family. One evening, as Lily and I worked on a puzzle at our dining table, she asked suddenly, "Will Grandma Sandra ever come back?" I considered my answer carefully. "I don't think so, sweetie. Sometimes people aren't able to be part of our lives in a healthy way." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "That's sad for her. She's missing knowing how awesome I am." I smiled at my daughter's simple wisdom. "Yes, she is. That's very sad for her." The experience with Sandra had taught me that sometimes protecting your family means taking a hard stand against toxic people even when they're related to you. Breaking generational cycles of abuse requires more than just avoiding the behaviors yourself. It sometimes requires actively defending against those who would perpetuate them. I had finally found the strength to stand firm against the manipulation and control that had dominated my childhood. In doing so, I had not only protected Lily, but modeled for her the importance of healthy boundaries and the courage to defend them. As for forgiveness, I had found a way to forgive Sandra, not for her sake, but for my own. This forgiveness didn't mean welcoming her back into our lives or forgetting the harm she had caused. It meant releasing the power her actions had over my emotions and moving forward unburdened by resentment. Today, Lily is thriving. She has her father's artistic talent and his infectious laugh. She has friends, hobbies, and the security of knowing she is deeply loved. When she looks at photos of Mason, she no longer asks who he is. Instead, she tells stories about him that I've shared, keeping his memory alive in her own way. As for me, I've found a peace I never thought possible growing up under Sandra's control. The final confrontation, though painful, provided a closure that allowed me to fully step into my own power as a mother and a woman. If you've ever faced someone who tried to control or manipulate you, especially a family member, Remember that you have the right to protect yourself and those you love. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggle. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to victor, and may you find the strength to write your own ending to any toxic relationship in your life.